My name is Manoj. I live here in Auroville. I would like to begin today's sharing with a short video. It's part of a longer video I have made on the spiritual history of India. And this clip gives an overview of the film. That one is original is more than an hour. This is only 7 minutes. And this one gives overview of what I will be sharing today. Let's begin that.
In the spiritual history of India, the first period was luminous with the discovery of the spirit by the Vedic rishis. Their keyword was yajna. This was followed by the Upanishadic rishis, who rediscovered the Vedic experience but gave it a new form. Their keyword was Brahman. The power of intuition was their means, and they laid the spiritual foundation of Indian civilization. Upon this foundation was built the second period, which laid the intellectual and philosophical foundations of Indian culture. It was an age of reason that spiritualized the mind of India. Their keyword was dharma. Upon this foundation of dharma was the luxurious flowering of Indian civilization into elaborate details of an opulent living. This was the third period in which Puranas and Tantra flourished. If Bhakti was the keyword to the Puranas, Shakti was the keyword to Tantra. They spiritualized the emotions, the life will, and the life of sensations of the civilization. It was the age of devotion and the age of power in India. By this time, what began with a small group of rishis had spread to cover the whole civilization and the wider Asia. The last period saw the attempt to spiritualize the body with the power of Hatha Yoga. However, this still awaits the discovery of the true characteristic method and power of spirit in the body. This period also saw the decline of Indian civilization under the impact of foreign invasions. The European colonization was a wake-up call upon India. Whatever temporary destruction this impact of European life and culture caused, on the positive side, it led to three needed impulses. It revived the dormant intellectual and critical impulse. It rehabilitated life and awakened the desire of new creation. It put the reviving Indian spirit face to face with novel conditions and ideals, and the urgent necessity of understanding, assimilating, and conquering them. India's rebirth began with social reformation movements with a spiritual orientation. Poets sourced their inspiration from ancient roots and promoted a new vision of Mother India. Artists gave birth to new forms of the ancient spirit. The ancient spiritual experience was recovered by three spiritual giants from Bengal. Sri Ramakrishna realized in himself all the spiritual wisdom of the ages. Swami Vivekananda's speech at Chicago was the most powerful message to the world that the giant Shakti of India was waking up. Sri Aurobindo awakened the will to freedom in India upon a spiritual foundation. He saw that the freedom and rebirth of India was only a step on the way, and that there was a greater role for India in the world. The world was heading for an evolutionary crisis. The human mind had reached a stage in its evolution. It had to go beyond the power of rational intelligence to a greater consciousness. But the ancient wisdom of India was fragmented and scattered into many schools of yoga that were incompatible. Sri Aurobindo recovered the secrets of the Veda through his own spiritual experiences. He mapped the entire spiritual history of India, synthesized its various schools of yoga, and gave birth to integral yoga, a yoga for the evolutionary transformation of human nature. He discovered the key to the divinization of the body, which the Hatha Yogins and Tantrics had missed. His integral yoga was in its principle a taking up and summarizing and completing of the ancient historic process that had been unfolding in India. It is a yoga that brought together the spirit and matter, individual and collective evolution for a divine life on earth. Sri Aurobindo synthesized the Eastern and Western ideas of evolution and boldly declared that humans are transitional beings. They are not final. Evolution continues and humans will be surpassed. This is the future awaiting humanity. This is an unprecedented adventure of consciousness on earth, and India is destined to play a leading role in this adventure. We do not belong to the past dawns, but to the noons of the future.
That's the overview of what happened in India and the context of integral yoga. And the sequence of development is what is critically important, not so much the dating, the centuries. That's secondary. I found this particular reference to the way the history of Indian spiritual development of the nation, development of the civilization, the way it unfolded across time, there is a very clear sequence to it and a process to it. Even when it appears to be like various empires coming and going randomly, like Gupta Empire, Mauryan Empire, preceding that many other ancient empires. They outwardly look like random series of empires coming and going. But behind the appearance, there is a development of consciousness. And I would like to read out Sri Aurobindo's original letter that led to this film, where he says, "I regard the spiritual history of mankind and especially of India, as a constant development of a divine purpose, not a book that is closed, the lines of which have to be constantly repeated. Even the Upanishads and the Gita were not final, though everything may be there in seed. And there's one more letter where he says, we may say that here in India, the reign of intuition came first, intellectual mind developing afterwards in the later philosophy and science. The effort of the Vedic mystics revealed to them the things behind through a power of inner sight and hearing, drishti and sruti, two faculties they had developed. Through a power of inner sight and hearing and experience which was confined to a limited number of seers and sages and kept carefully secret from the mass of humanity. Secrecy was always insisted on by the mystics. We may very well attribute this flowering of intuition on the spiritual plane. Flowering of intuition on the spiritual plane. So here I want you to look at that framework of the body and the reference of the chakra system. The spiritual planes are above, and he's referring to flowering of intuition on spiritual plane, that is above. The Vedic age was having access to the ranges that were far above what is normally access to us, having access to us. And he also refers a rapid re-emergence of the essential gains brought down from a previous cycle. He is also referring to pre-Vedic civilization, and that knowledge was lost. And the Vedic cycle that happened in India was a rapid re-emergence of what was already accomplished in the past that was practically lost. Then he continues. The Vedic age, if we analyze the spiritual history of India, we shall find that after reaching this height, there was a descent which attempted to take up each lower degree of the already evolved consciousness and link it to the spiritual side. That's the key. There was the Vedic rishis ascending to a higher reality, higher planes of consciousness, and from that point onwards there was a descending movement into lower planes of existence and then lifting it up and linking it with the spiritual. So that was the framework that he gave. And the Vedic age was followed by a great outburst of intellectual philosophy which yet took spiritual truth as its basis and tried to reach it anew, not through direct intuitive or occult process as did the Vedic seers, but by the power of mind's reflective, speculative, logical thought. So the first phase, before we proceed, I would like to explain that part. The Vedic period, which also includes two phases of it, Veda and Vedanta, which actually precedes the age of reason. We have a vast, or rather vast probably is not the right word, a simultaneous emergence of rational intelligence, philosophical schools across the world, somewhere around 600 BC. We can see in Greece there was all the philosophers, Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, they were all emerging. In China, Lao Tzu and Qin, and in India there were many intellectual philosophers emerging. All the intellectual flowering like Patanjali, Panini, all these people were happening, and this was a period of intellectual development. Whereas the Vedic period, both Vedantic, original Vedantic and the Vedic, that was not intellectual. And this is very, very critically important to recognize, because we are a product of that intellectual development reaching a certain stage of development, whereas the preceding stage was not based on rational intelligence. It was more of a mystical period where they could, Vedic rishis, they could develop these faculties of Shruti and Drishti. Drishti is faculty of seeing, an intuitive vision by which you are able to see beyond the outer material appearances, to see the divine reality beyond the physical and subtler planes of existence beyond the physical. And the faculty of Shruti, the truth hearing, by which they could access the mantras. And the mantra was their power. And mystical, the method. And they were the first one we have in the history of India, documented evidence. They had access to the spiritual reality. But their method was mystical. And we can say they were interdimensional in their access. When I say interdimensional, we can see in the Vedas the encounters with the gods. The gods were living entities with whom they could engage with. And I'm referring to gods, not God. For them, the forces of nature were conscious powers with whom they could come in touch with, know their intention, and collaborate with or fight with. And there was the first essay when Sri Aurobindo began writing an aria to describe his vision. He started writing about the Vedas. In the Vedas, the very first essay he wrote was the colloquy, the dialogue between Agastya and Indra, where Agastya was exploring the higher levels of consciousness, and Indra, in the Vedic world, Indra was the lord of the divine mind. Indra would say, I will not let you pass. And Agastya was trying to access the divine realms of consciousness through the power of thought. In those days, it was referred to as Maruts. Marut is again the goddess of power of thought. And Agastya was going ahead with this force to access the higher realm. And the Indra would come up and say, you cannot cross this without dealing with me, without surrendering to me. And Agastya will ask, why? We are your brothers, why are you not letting me cross? And Indra would explain, it is not by the power of thought you can reach the higher realms. You need to surrender to me. You have to sacrifice, you have to offer the sacrifice to me, and then I will take you forward in the journey. So this language we find in the Vedas is very mystical. And it's hard to comprehend for a modern mind. What is this dialogue with Indra? What is this dialogue with Manoj? What is this battle? Actually, it's not very far from our living reality. There must be a reason why Sri Aurobindo started with this particular dialogue when he started writing for the world. If we look at modern science, power of reason, the power of thought, this is our highest faculty currently. It is with this power we are trying to access the realms that are beyond by accessing all the energies and powers of nature, and we are trying to shoot into a realm that is not really accessible, and there is a battle that is going on, and we can see the battle on earth. Higher consciousness is saying, no, you can't proceed further without dealing with me. And the power of thought cannot proceed into higher realms. And in the case of Agastya, he surrenders to Indra, and Indra leads the way. Indra is the lord of the higher consciousness who will transcribe. Like Indra is also the power that gives not only the knowledge but also the power. So the Vedic rishis had these two movements. One is the aspiration, Agni, rising upward, the force of aspiration, instinct with power of truth that is trying to reach, to progress to higher realms. And there is a response from above, which is Indra is on the other pole, the divine wisdom, revealing itself through the lightning flashes of intuition and bringing its power and organizing itself in the lower nature. That was their process, and it was an intuitive process. Their process was, first of all, starting from the aspiration in the heart, Agni in the heart. Therefore, the Vedas begins with the invocation to Agni. Agni is our deepest evolutionary impulse that is there in the seed that makes a seed to sprout, makes a tree to grow, make our civilization to strive for perfection, towards truth, towards harmony, that impulsion. They were tuning into that force, and with that force ascending. And when you tune into that force, there is a divine grace that pours into. And that's what we see later in modern language. Auroville transcribes in his the little booklet, the mother, the call from below and the grace from above. In their conjunction, the transformation happens. But the advantage of the Vedic rishis was that it was a period that preceded the age of reason. It was the age of intuition, and there was no veil of reason and the whole knowledge created by the power of reason. And we have that sitting over our head. And it's hard for us to even to come in touch with the true aspiration that is within and the power of aspiration. So there was this Vedic mystics rising and discovering the higher realms. And the process was called yajna. The yajna is in modern language translated as sacrifice, which unfortunately doesn't grasp the true essential meaning of yajna, where all that we do is an offering born out of that profound aspiration, in alignment with aspiration towards progress. When we are offering that to the higher powers, like Agastya was asked to offer his thought, his power of thought, everything to the higher powers. When that offering happens, then there is a pouring down of inspiration, revelation, and the power of transformation. And they ascended with that power, and by reception of these powers into themselves. So the story was like when you ascend, the gods takes birth in you. That was their language. In modern language, we can say the higher faculties of consciousness will descend into the mold of human body and transform the mind, transform our cognitive system, not only cognitive system but also the power of action in the world. So they were developing within them these powers of truth consciousness, drishti, truth seeing. Our normal sight is not capable of seeing truth. It is bound to the senses. they were developing the power of truth seeing. It was called drishti, direct seeing of truth. Then there is other faculty called Shruti, which is mistranslated later as heard from your lineage and you carry forward oral tradition, because it is taught orally. It is not that, it is truth hearing. So truth seeing, truth hearing and truth remembrance, smriti. That was another faculty that begins to open up when you enter the path of this yoga using this process. So they had mapped all the higher realms of consciousness using the process. They refer to as yajna. And the whole thing was documented, or documented is not the right word. They were seers of mantras. Like in today's modern body of scientific knowledge, we say the laws of motion was discovered by the scientist called Newton. The laws of the theory of relativity goes to Einstein, and various laws of physics are associated with a specific scientist. Similarly, the Vedic body of mantras, for every mantra there was a discoverer. The Rishi discovered the mantra, who is the deity of the mantra, the godhead of the mantra. And that mantra can be activated, and that is most transformative. That was the technology they used, if I may use the word technology to use mantras. The power of word to create transformation. Not normal word, but the divine word, capital W. And we can see Sri Aurobindo's Savitri is mantra of transformation. Savitri is daughter of the sun, born to say word that is capable of transformation. We know how to tune into the word. And this is not the normal ordinary word, but word coming from a higher stage of consciousness, transcribing itself into the mental substance and translating into vocabulary that human beings can understand in terms of the mind. So there was this science of mantra and the whole body of mantra. Then what happened was that knowledge was lost. And then came another period of rediscovering that, and that is Upanishadic period. And these rishis also used the method of intuition, but that time they were really the bridge between the age of the mystics and the age of reason that was about to come in India. So the Upanishadic rishis used the power of concentrated meditation to rediscover the knowledge of the Vedas, and they restated the knowledge of the Veda, and they gave a new vocabulary, and they referred to their ultimate reality as Brahman. So they were the seekers of Brahman, and they recast the knowledge in the form of Upanishads. So Upanishads and the Vedas are two different forms of ancient knowledge, very, very different in their structure, their vocabulary, and Upanishads acted as a bridge between the Vedic mystics and the age of reason. And this bridge was missing in, for example, in Greece. Greece had its age of mysteries. Then Greece had its age of reason and philosophers. But that in-between bridge was lost. There was a big gap. So it is that body of ancient knowledge. Egyptians had it, but that civilization also ended. But in India, with Vedic knowledge preserved, plus the Upanishads recasting it into modern forms, the bridge was there. Then came the age of reason. Age of reason is when the keyword became dharma. So you can see from yajna was the keyword to the Vedic mystics, and the method was mystical, and Upanishadic rishis had Brahman as the focus, and they were using the power of tapasya and the concentration. So you can see some of the Upanishads says Om is the seed, and concentrate on Om, and you can ascend and discover the higher realms. And they rediscovered and gave it a new form. And then came the age of reason, where there were a vast body of knowledge flourishing across India, 6 systems of knowledge, 6 darshanas emerged, the Sankhyas and Charvakas and various other schools. Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, for example, is one school among many branches that emerged. That is also the period where 2 major religions got formed, the Buddhism and Jainism. And the word dharma became the key. So, Buddham Saranam Gacchami, Sangham Saranam Gacchami, Dhammam Saranam Gacchami, dharma. And we can see Mahabharata, Ramayana, they were all dealing with dharma. What is the dharma of a king? And that's the key debate in these earlier epics. And elaboration of that knowledge in the form of intellectual narrative that is much more accessible to the masses. So Ramayana and Mahabharata took up this ancient knowledge, the Vedic knowledge, Upanishadic knowledge, all that, and again recast them in a new form. So here there is a descending movement happening from a plane of intuition. It is coming down to, we can say, these 2 chakras in the body framework, where darshanas is coming from that vision of the mind. And there was actually fragmentation of the knowledge in India into various branches. That's what happens with the intellectual development. But what was happening in India was spiritualizing the mind. Taking up the intellectual capacity, developing it and turning it towards spiritual realization. And we can see its pinnacle happening in Buddha, where the mind was spiritualized, pure reason was spiritualized, and Patanjali's Yoga Sutras and Sankhya systems, and all of them were actually refining the power of reason. And that's also the time when Panini codified Sanskrit. The ancient language was similar to Sanskrit, but it was not Sanskrit. It was what Shobhita referred to as the Deva Bhasha. And Sanskrit was, he would refer to that as a skeleton of the original living language. So Sanskrit was pure reason, and the structural way of generating language, generating grammar, all that was developed. And India branched off into various schools, and also what began as a small group of rishis were now spreading across the country in the form of Mahabharata, Ramayana, that were much more accessible, storytelling began. Even the ancient ones were also story, mantric references were also about stories, but they were mystical stories. It's hard to make sense out of the Vedic narratives. Whereas when we read Mahabharata or Ramayana, there is a lot of it we can relate in our human dimension. And then these storytellers took it to the masses. So there was a gradual spiritualization of the civilization and the mind of the civilization. And that's also when the university started emerging. The Takshashila, one of the earliest university, was emerging at that time. And that development went on for quite some time. And then consciousness was coming down. So remember, Shri was referring to consciousness was coming down from above, taking up part by part and lifting it and turning it towards spiritualization. So then it was coming down, and it came down to the heart center, and that's when here he says, then followed an era of development of philosophies and yoga processes which more and more use the emotional and aesthetic being as the means of spiritual realization and spiritualized the emotional level in man through the heart and feeling. That's when the Indian civilization or the spiritual development is coming down to the heart center. So now it has crossed the intellectual development, all the Patanjali's, Panini's, all the 6 systems of six schools of philosophies, all that, preceding that in mystical forms. Now it is coming down, and this is the time Puranas would flourish in India. And the Bhakti become the keyword. And that is when in India the temple worship began. Till then there was no temples in India. There was no culture of deity worship as we see it in today's India. Vedic period, the nature was the living embodiment of divine, and they could relate to the conscious forces behind nature. And that was continued by the Upanishadic period, and the intellectual philosophers went to the pure meditation over reason and the pure formless abstractions. They could go into the Brahman, which is formless, directly from the mind. But for the heart of the masses to turn towards the divine, these abstractions will not be of help. So came Bhakti movement, creation of the temples, the pujas, the rituals, the worship, all that started spreading. And the Gupta Empire was the period where this flourished. That's when the music, art, every 64 arts, all this started flourishing in India, and one of the finest golden periods of Indian history during the Gupta period, the Puranas were flourishing. And Puranic form of expression is very, very different from what preceded before. Purana again is not based on reason. Puranic expressions are emotional and psychic. And they are describing the psychic worlds. They are not describing the outer physical world at all. Though there are many Puranas which trace the lineages and also trace the history of the civilization. So what is happening in India is the knowledge is evolving. Also the consciousness is coming down, taking up, turning the heart towards spiritualization, the Bhakti movement, but also recasting the knowledge into new forms. The Puranic form is very different from Upanishadic form. Upanishad is very different from the Vedic form. So there is always a recasting of the knowledge happening, taking the essence, applying it in the new evolutionary context where the emotions were taken up, refined, turned towards the divinity and divinizing that. So there was a series of, we can say, those people like Mirabai and later Kabir. And there was always a lineage of the Bhakti movement flourishing in India happening from that period. And as it came down, that's when the Tantra started emerging. When it came to the navel, then the Shakti emerged. The power to master the forces of nature. Basically, between Tantra and Puranic period, they were very close to the Purano-Tantric period, where technologies became more and more prominent, and the temples became more and more massive, and Indian culture was spreading across Southeast Asia. And we can see the temples, the yantras and mantras. And yantra became the framework for building temples. And these were the method, technologies by which they were mastering the forces of nature and supporting the development of civilization and kingdoms. And so there was a powerful development of Tantra in India, which is mastering the forces of nature. And Shakti became the key word during Tantric period. And further, as it came down, that's when sensuality was taken up. And turning the sensual experience and turning it towards the divine. All that happened. So we have Tantric schools that went into the exploration of the senses, sensorial reality, sensorial pleasure, and how to take that and turn it towards divine realization. Because there was already a well-developed intellectual framework already established. It is on that foundation the emotions were purified and turned upward. And upon that foundation the powers were there, and upon that foundation the senses were taken up and turned towards. So we can see like Khajuraho temples, full of sensuality, human relationship, sensual connection, man, woman, all that was explored in India thoroughly, the material, sensual life, and refining it and turning it towards spiritual growth was thoroughly explored. So that's coming down to the Swadhisthana Chakra. We can look at the bodily framework. Then the consciousness was going down further to divinize the body. That's when the Hatha Yoga began in India. It is roughly around 1000 years ago. So Tantrics gave a completely new form to knowledge. Very different from Puranic knowledge. So you can see the knowledge, the spiritual knowledge was growing in its complexity, but at the same time getting recast in new forms with every shift in consciousness and taking up and translating it into a spiritual possibility. From there, then it hits the Muladhara Chakra to take up the body consciousness. How to divinize the body. And that was the challenge they took up. And for that, they developed the Hatha Yogic practices, the asanas, and establishing stillness in the body, mastering the pranic force, and making the body a bridge to connect with the spirit. But in that, they were still using the methods. This is where Sri Aurobindo points out something very crucial for us, our understanding. The methods used by the Hatha Yogis were not the methods that is native to the spirit in matter, in the physical dimension. And the processes were so elaborate, they had to fully withdraw from the mainstream life in order to focus on this work. And all your time goes into developing, transforming the physical body. They accomplished a great deal of siddhis in the body, whether it is health, longevity, all these dimensions of the body were accomplished, but they couldn't deal with the world and the society. On the top of it, one fundamental problem, when consciousness goes downward into Muladhara and downward, we are entering physical consciousness and what we refer to as the subconscient, which is less and less conscious. And with it, civilization was in a way entering into a dream stage and falling asleep, because you are entering into a dense strata of consciousness and civilization was gradually falling into sleep stage. And that's when the philosophies like world is nothing but illusion, it is Maya, it's not real, only the spirit is real, all that came into the picture. And as a result, as India was declining, the invasions were coming to India. And India was withdrawing and falling asleep, and India was taken over. And we know the history of India falling into tamas, and India lost all that glorious past. And there was a steep submergence into tamas. And from that tamasic India, into that tamasic India came the European invasion, where the new cycle of civilization was beginning, starting with European awakening and taking up of the power of reason in Europe and development of science and technology with which they were coming here and shaking up this sleeping giant. And India's awakening that was happening, and slowly India recovering the ancient spirit. That's what was happening to Sri Ramakrishna, then Swami Vivekananda extended it, and Sri Aurobindo was diving deep into it. And the stage of work, what was unfolding was, again, remember, it was coming down, chakra by chakra, layer by layer, coming down all the way. Spirit and matter, and divinization of the matter, divinization of the body was the work ongoing. And it is in that context, Sri Aurobindo was looking at the entire journey. He rediscovered and mapped the entire process. And he was also looking into why did Hatha Yogis fail to divinize the body? Why did it remain as an isolated accomplishment of the individual siddhi, not as a general accomplishment in nature? That's when that investigation went deeper, when he saw that the power of supermind which is involved in matter and bridging that with supermind that is above, only that can successfully transform the physical nature. No other power can actually transform the physical nature. And therefore the stress became the supramental manifestation of earth, because it is also the time when divinization of the body and material world and the physical world is the step nature has set in motion. And his work was to how to now access that and bring that into this global range, so that it is not by the Hatha yogic methods we are attempting the transformation of the physical material body itself and transformation of the world, but by bringing in the power of the spirit that is involved in matter itself. And that's the work that is set in motion by Sri Aurobindo and Mother. And integral yoga is taking up of that entire journey and giving it a completely new form. And remember, India has been recasting its body of knowledge across these centuries, across this millennium, based on the specific work that is unfolding in India. Not only in India, it has its repercussion across the world. So there is a whole new articulation which can successfully deal with the physical nature and its difficulties. The realizations, spiritual realization, psychic realization, these things have already been accomplished in the past. But the supramental realization and divinization of the body from it and establishing in the general nature that consciousness and a resultant evolutionary leap in humanity, that is an entirely new phase that he has set in motion, and it is not something that happened in isolation. There is a historic process of at least 5,000 years, and there is a sequential development to it, there is a process to it, and it is now reached a new stage where matter is getting churned, and there is a transformation that is ongoing, and there is a process of how to engage with it. So this doesn't mean that all that has gone before is obsolete. Essential gains of all that previous cycles and knowledge is to be distilled and given a new form. And that's what we have. And even the new mantra of transformation that is available to us. And so there is all that has preceded before: the spiritualization of the mind, spiritualization of the heart, spiritualization of the vital, spiritualization of the senses, and spiritualization and transformation of the physical itself are now happening on a large scale, and there is corresponding massive disruption happening on earth. But it is a disruption which is a part of the process of an emergence of something entirely new. So with that, I would like to now take up your questions, observations. Maybe I would like to read out the remaining part of the lecture where he is saying, in Hatha Yoga and in the various attempts at divinization of the body, there is also a line of endeavor which attempted to arrive at the same achievement with regard to living matter. But this still awaits the discovery of the true characteristic method and power of spirit in the body. Our yoga, in its principle, at taking up and summarizing and completing of this process, an endeavor to rise to the highest possible supramental level and bring down its consciousness and powers into mind, life, and body. So that letter gave me the framework to the research. So I did my studies, and based on that I made this film called Spiritual History of India, It gives context to integral yoga and what's happening on earth. So
How far can Hatha Yoga prompt a divinization of matter? Because we see that people, when we say yoga, they immediately relate to Hatha Yoga.
correct.
It's all about asanas, where the union with the divine takes a backseat, or you're not even aware of. So, with Hatha Yoga, is there a divinization of matter possible?
He was referring to living body. There is a living body and matter, where life has not yet emerged. The physical material matter, and then there is a living body, like our body is a living body. So Hatha Yogis were trying to divinize the living body, but it failed because they were not using the method that is appropriate for the material nature. And that's also the reason why they have to develop elaborate methods that consume all their time, even for accomplishing their siddhis. And that will remain also as an isolated individual capacity, not something that will spread into the human nature across. What Mother was doing, this is where the supramental force was brought in, and even the cellular habits were attempted to change in a body that is universalized. Even though her body was, for us, in Pondicherry, tiny little body, but that is not the deeper truth. That body is universalized and it embraces the entire humanity and life on earth. So it is into that she was pouring in that new consciousness and changing the cellular habits in the very material substance, rewiring it. And that method, that alone can actually divinize. And from there, to what extent it will go into matter itself, we have to see how it will be taken up. First is making the human body itself more and more transformed, where she foresees that even our digestive system, circulatory system, all that will eventually disappear, and the material substance will be a density of consciousness. So a new type of matter itself would emerge. But these are waiting ahead in the course of evolution. Scientists are already working on longevity of the body, but based on understanding of the genetic science. But there is not the knowledge of how to transform that base. And our attempt to modify the gene structure is also based on a limited mental understanding of taking up one strand of life and trying to modify it without ability to see the large symphony of life. Whereas Mother's work is coming from identifying the larger symphony of life and from there tuning into the cellular level and modifying it and shifting the consciousness at that level. And that work is rippling across the world now. There will be whole new emergence that will be unprecedented. We cannot imagine it because it's a whole new phase of transformation unfolding on earth. Hatha Yoga is still useful, very useful from a health perspective. The physical health, robust health, Hatha Yoga is excellent, particularly the postures that can cure diseases. Even a single posture, when you are able to hold the body sufficiently long, it is not really about doing many different asanas. It is about what is the particular asana that you require to make a shift in the body consciousness, and holding that posture, bringing your consciousness into it, your breath into it, and pouring a higher consciousness into it. Then that shift happens. The posture helps to concentrate your attention, your consciousness into specific parts of the body where you can pour in consciousness. So that way it will be very useful, but we can extend and expand its possibilities and be open to the Shakti and the workings of the Shakti, which will show the posture. We need not follow the posture that is conventionally taught by the various schools of Hatha Yoga. Because the Shakti herself can show you where to stretch, how to move, and bring in the posture. So now you hold that posture as long as you can and bring in peace into it or light into it. All that. So there's a whole new phase that is on it.
Another question. We were dwelling in the age of devotion. That gave rise to a lot of superstition. What was happening in the West?
It's not, when it comes to the masses, the age of devotion is also the time when spirituality was spreading into the masses. So when you want to take something to the masses, you need to create stories that are much more relatable, yet containing a deep symbolic meaning, and simple rituals by which they can turn their emotions towards a deity, which is again a symbolic representation of a deeper, higher consciousness. So methods and processes were developed and designed and given, but down the line what happens is these rituals, these worships, these things become a mechanical process. They would forget what was the original intention behind rituals, ceremonies, what is the original meaning. Then it becomes a religion and it becomes a superstition. So it's a degenerate condition, but originally, like today, we need to also design our rituals consciously, understanding the principles. And rituals are a very powerful way of transforming and especially pouring our emotions into active process of transformation. So there is a whole lot of superstition in the country because people do not anymore know why they practice what they practice. That's why it is important to break the molds and find the essential knowledge and recast the form. So if you look at Mandir, it is called Mandir. If you ask anywhere in India, Mandir is temple. But if you look at Mandir, it's not a temple in conventional sense. It represents something very universal. There is no rituals, there is no ceremonies. Though there is our own rituals. We go alone, be silent, sit there. We don't call it ritual, but it is a modern ritual. But we are not doing all that. It's not necessary. Though I am not saying that the bells are not useful. If you know Tantra, if you study, if you know the principles behind it, and if you apply that rituals, you will still get powerful results. But you must know what you are doing. Mantra has its power. Rituals have its tremendous power. But you must know what you are doing. Like when we sit in the amphitheater, February 28th and August 15th with a big fire lit, it's a whole new ritual. People sitting silently. Now hundreds of people sitting silently, it requires enormous discipline. It's very easy to sit and chat around, but doing nothing, sitting around a flame, which goes back to the very ugly, but entirely new conception. And that's a yajna, if I may use that word. And also Auroville is a place of yajna, where transformational work is happening. And our daily life is a sacrament, a conscious offering to a process of transformation. So Mother has created Auroville as a, in modern language we can say lab, in ancient language we can say yajna, where work is the process. It's a conscious process by which we can rapidly evolve, and the force field is established here. So when you offer yourself, submit yourself to the divine Shakti and her action, she will take up and she will form things, and then when you stagnate, she will come and smash all that. So there is a process of constantly molding, remolding, recasting, and all forms of resistance will be shown up, and she has brought in people from all over the world, each one representing a possibility of light, at the same time certain shadow to be transformed. So Auroville is a place where both light and shadow gets amplified in the Yajna, in this lab, and there is a battle, a journey to go through and arrive at increasingly at the living presence and guidance of the light and force Mother has established here. So this is a modern ritual. What we did on February 28th, people bringing a handful of soil from all the nations and putting it into a home. It's a profound ritual. It's a modern ceremony that has an immense spiritual significance. So we need to be open and consciously recognize new rituals, new ceremonies, and new process of transformation, which is no more individual transformation, it is a collective transformation. It's a collective yoga. And the collective ascension that is set in motion. Questions?
What is the force that drives that change?
Many ways we can articulate it. One is force of evolution, I believe, from below. The other is the divine force. But the question for us is, how do we discern the divine force when it is acting through individual and collective disruption? Periodically happens. Existing stagnant forms can get ruthlessly demolished when tremendous force enters. But if we are not able to receive what is entering, we ourselves might get in the process disrupted and damaged. So preparing ourselves to receive the descending force, individually and collectively, is one of the primary work that we need to do, and character of the force that is entering an individual, ability to discern it. For example, when a higher consciousness, a divine, say Mother's force enters, a higher consciousness enters, the stamp of that force is peace. It establishes stillness, it establishes peace, and it establishes clarity. It removes confusion, it brings stability, it gives strength. Whereas the forces of lower nature, when it enters, it brings sense of disturbance. It brings restlessness. It brings anger. It brings sorrow. It brings pain. It brings suffering. And we disintegrate along with it. Now, the challenge is the higher density of peace is not something that anyone can receive. When we go to Shavindra Samadhi, often we see many tourists who come and they just looking around. They have no clue what's going on here. Can't even sense the presence of that profound peace that is settled there. Their very body is incapable of sensing, does not develop the sufficient sensitivity to know what is entering them. It's opaque, it's dark, it is thick. They need to get into their restless movement so that they feel that I am active. Another one is this lack of receptivity, the thickness, the dullness of the body to receive. The second thing is, you receive a little bit of influx into you. With it also comes the parts that are to be transformed are brought out. The stuff that you did not deal with, stuff that you try to run away from. For example, many people, when they come to Auroville, some of them are coming with like, I don't want that mess in my life. I'm in a way running away from challenges. And they come, here is a ready-made heaven I can move into, I sign up and be part of it. And you jump in and the stuff that you try to run away from multiplies and comes in front of you, disturbing, churning, challenging everything inside you. And there's no way to run away from that. So when we submit ourselves to the force of transformation, she also churns you and bring out, and we would experience cycles of disturbance, cycles of anger, cycles of depression, cycles of pain, suffering. Instead of throwing that out at somebody else, because that is the easiest thing to do, and also it will show up in the context of someone else out there saying something to you, and you are triggered out of proportion, and you're boiling with rage, and the other person is the cause of my turmoil, and you are causing disturbance, and I need to fix you. And that's the trap in which people tend to fall, and that's where you get completely lost, and you become the agent of destruction. And you will turn the other person as the evil, the asura, the dark forces destroying this or that. And you have intelligence to come up with stories, and it's very easy. But when you look at yourself, what's happening to your nerves, what's happening to your muscle, what's happening to your body, what's happening to your mind, what type of energy is entering and rippling through you. You know the truth. You don't need anything else. So when something rises up, when the consciousness in the process of transformation pulls out the stuff to be dealt with, first thing is not to mistake it, it's because of so and so, but to see, okay, stuff has shown up. There is a mirror principle to be applied, there is stuff to be dealt with. Now how do I gain my ground, my inner Christ? So in integral yoga, first phase is Vedantic, that is establishing the immobile ground of being, the pure consciousness, not bound to any forms, free and vast, like a stage, an infinitely wide stage, upon which whatever be the stuff that rose up from inside you, or someone else who is triggered is throwing that stuff at you, and everything is coming to you. And particularly in a context like Auroville, where there is an intensity of transformation, people are triggered everywhere. And the journey, the galaxy is already churning people. And people are triggered, and whether you like it or not, you will be somebody else's bad guy in their personal story. And you may want to play the savior, but you are experienced as a villain in their story, and they are trying to put you down and hunt you down, and all that happens. Now, this is part of the process to recognize that when you get locked into such perceptions, the churning is happening. And you see, can I take a deep breath and can you get back to the ground so that this cloud begins to settle. It settles and settles and settles. And whatsoever was meant to be learned through that, the truth that was unrecognized, which was holding the pulse to take place, because nothing lives and sustains itself without a grain of truth. So when something is persisting and demanding your attention, and if you keep rejecting it as nothing but falsehood, what is that tiny little grain that is enabling that falsehood to survive? Even if it is 99% falsehood, there's some 1% it is holding on to as a grain that keeps it alive. Once you recognize that grain of truth and accept it, and then the bubble collapses, and then the grain becomes part of you. So that transformation is ongoing. So the force is there, and force, if it is growing peace, growing stillness, growing wideness, growing clarity, even we are moving in the right direction. But if we get into the one or other narrative that gets formed in the mind and stick to this or that narrative, we get lost in the narratives because the mind cannot truly know. This is where the physical comes in more and more handy, because when a well-trained body is able to sense the vibrations that are flowing through it, when there is pure peace that is enveloping the body, it's not an analysis, it's a direct experience of the very substance of the body. So the body becomes a great ally in this journey, where body is growing in peace more and more, in stillness more and more, and body can receive the force without disruption. And even when something is rising up from below, or somebody throws stuff at you, you can still hold it without breaking down. Otherwise, it will crack up. So training the body will become very crucial for our journey in this battleground, because the body can know in terms of human vibrations what is entering, and that is far more reliable when combined with the psychic discernment. It is far more reliable compared to the explanation the mind is giving. Mind can interpret anything and everything in all possible ways. Mind is a brilliant storyteller, but very, very unreliable. Emotions also too volatile, unreliable. Whereas the body, when it is trained, becomes great ally in sensing truth and force.
It is the role of teaching. Hatha Yoga can easily be taught.
Yes. Yeah, how do we teach aspiration, for example? Not a technique, but we can prepare ourselves, just like we can keep our windows and doors open so that when the breeze comes, we can enter. But when the breeze will come, that's not in our hands. But the doing part is keep the house clean, keep the doors open so the light, breeze, all that can enter. This much we can do and we need to do. But when that wave comes, and learning to sense its presence and to surrender to its guidance and its movement, even when our mind is not able to understand. That's very important. Often the mind is not able to understand where the divine is leading. All the mental constructions are standing on the way. This is not how you are supposed to be. And all the moral things, everything stands on the way. So to put aside all the mental constructions and to enter into the action of the force which can organize everything. Because work is actually being done by the force. It will bring in the people, circumstances, everything, and then you see that it's not you who are doing it, it's just unfolding effortlessly, naturally, freely, and you are resting in action. And you become more and more worship because you see that, oh, that something is brought into your life, and also something is disrupting, and then you pause and you wait. Okay, what is going on here? Where are you? How am I to proceed? So what is thy will? That question becomes more and more central, and how do I surrender to that divine will? Yeah, it's difficult to teach, but we can be more and more, and there is natural ripples. We can create containers. A place like Savitri is a container where we hold a space where things can happen. So we need containers. We can create containers and keep the containers ready where when the pouring happens, pouring happens. So with that, shall we finish? Thank you.
Thank you so much.